Hello lovely people, this week I'm back with another book chat video, the regular but not monthly roundup of what I have read recently. Did that need to be sung? It never needs to be sung.
Doobie 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 Sophie vlogs.
Have a lot of thoughts this week. I feel like I say that every time because I do have lots of thoughts always, but I've had particularly a lot to think about this time, so I'm going to dive into it. First of all, I'm going to kick things off with some fantasy. That is Madoc, which is the third book in Jack Vance's Leoness trilogy. There's been a little bit of a break since I read the second book and reading the third book, and I mentioned in my book chats where I talked about the other two that I was having a little bit of trouble with the series. I've definitely gotten over that a little bit with this third book, and it's given me, I've been pondering, if you will. So I'll give you a little plot setup, and then I'll sort of talk about like my journey with this series. So without spoiling anything, because it is the third book in a series, this series takes place in this sort of fantasy world, which is sort of based around like Britain, the Celtic Isles, like Europe, that sort of thing. But all of these like legendary cities, like Leoness, which is supposed to have disappeared under the waves of the sea at some point, a little bit like a Celtic Atlantis, if you will, I believe. And like Avalon and lots of Arthurian stuff and all that sort of thing. So like it's draws a lot on fairy tales and folk tales and legends of the British Isles slash Celtic Isles, if you will, that sort of thing. So it's a really interesting world, actually. We've sort of got macro stories, micro stories. So our macro story is about all of the conflict between these different nations and tussling for power. I'll sort of leave my plot summary there because I don't want to spoil anything. But Madoc, the name of this book, is named after a character who is a fairy changeling who King Casimir for a very long time believed to be his granddaughter, daughter of Soldan, but we know to be a fairy changeling, and we know that his actual grandson is elsewhere. So the title would suggest that Madoc, our little fairy changeling, who we've only briefly really mentioned previously, we've not really focused on her very much, is a main focus of this book. Okay, right, into my experiences with this series. I think my problem with the first two books was a little bit that they have quite an interesting form insofar as he does a lot of, especially I found this especially with the second book, a lot of jumping between narratives, but not really. I struggled with it essentially because every time I felt like I was settling into a plot thread, I was taken out of the plot thread and I was taken somewhere else. And I wanted more time with, you know, like you're just finally, you're like, okay, I'm with it, and then you're somewhere else, and you're like, no, but I was there. If that makes sense. This book I think I found easier because this book has a much more linear, like, narrative form insofar as we just spend a lot of time on, we do flip between places, but we spend longer in each place. And a lot of this is concerned with Madoc, and she goes on this quest to find her essentially to discover her father, because she finds out that her mother is a fairy, not the Princess Soldan as she believed, and then she goes on this journey to find out her parentage and all this sort of thing. And it's this wonderful case of this character that you haven't really thought about much because she's not really focused on a lot. And then she does this delightful questing which really picks up on book one. Book one, with Soldan's actual son, has this whole element of very much fairy tale questing and playing with the genre like self-awarely. And this book picked up on that again, but with Madoc, and I really enjoyed that sort of paralleling. I think essentially, like, reading this reminded me of the things I liked about the first two books, but the form was such that I found it easier to engage with and continue with it. So now that I have finished the series, I think I'm looking back on it much more favourably than I think I probably did when I recorded my first two reviews, because I've enjoyed seeing it all come together, and it does all come together. I felt very satisfied at the end of this. And I also, I think I appreciate the ways in which this play is self-aware of the genres which it's engaging with, and just like, you know, when like a character just brings it all together and you're like, ew, it's such a good job. So yes, definitely enjoyed this more, considering at some point in the far future, because I have too many books, doing a reread of the series because I wonder if I would be able to embrace it much more now that I'm sort of aware of the plotting, if you will, and the narrative form. And if I'm going in with self-awareness, maybe I'll be able to like engage with it a little bit more. But we'll see. That'll be a while away because I have too many books and not enough time. Changing tack slightly with something quite different. We've got The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side by Agatha Christie. Please ignore the fact that my book has turned into like a strange little wiggle. That's me doing bad book storage, I think. I love Agatha Christie, and I haven't read any Agatha Christie in a very long time. My nan had all of Agatha Christie's books, and she used to lend them to me. Like, I'd go, and I'd be like, could you recommend me one to read? And then she'd be like, you should try this one. So this is a remnant of my nan's ones. Sadly, when she passed away, we did have to give lots of them away, because I do not have space for the entire works of Agatha Christie on my bookshelves. Sadly. So I kept some that I could dip into, and I haven't dipped into them in a while, and it just reminded me of how much I love Agatha Christie and the masterful way in which she, like, sets out her little threads and then pulls them all together again, which is an apt metaphor, because we're all making some Lady of Shalott references here. The setup of this one is, it's a Miss Marple book, and it's interesting because Miss Marple is much older in this, and she's being treated a lot of the time in the plot like essentially like she cannot function just because she is old, whereas the plot is very much showing you that just because she is an old woman, it doesn't mean like she's just lost everything that she's interested in and she just wants to sit in a chair all day. Like, she's bright in her mind and she's still quick, and I don't know, like she's just fabulous. And okay, so long story short, Gossington Hall has been bought by some fancy movie stars. They're holding a benefit thing. One of Miss Marple's friends goes, and while she's there, someone gets poisoned. And then it's all like, who is the intended victim of this poisoning? And then just the usual wonderful, like, giving you a little peppering of clues. Will you pick up on them? I did not. So yes, thoroughly enjoyable. I will say it's not one of her most dazzling books, like some of the utter wonderful ones that she's done are, but I wanted like a fun little murder mystery, and that's entirely what I got. After that is How to Stop Time by Matt Haig, which I was really excited to read because I've heard so many good things about Matt Haig. I perfectly enjoyed this. This is about Tom Hazard, and Tom Hazard has this sort of, I'm going to call it like a condition, don't know if that's the right word. Essentially, like, he just ages much slower than the normal human, and he's not the only one. It's like there are people in this world who can live for hundreds and hundreds of years because their body just doesn't degenerate at the same rate as, like, mine does. And then it's all looking at, he's part of this society, and the society sort of has rules for functioning, and, you know, like, how long can you stay in one place without aging before you have to move because people start to get suspicious. That was an enjoyable aspect, because that's like a real, you know, sometimes you read fantasy books, or, like, fantastical books, and you're just like, but let me think about the practicalities of how this situation would actually work. This book definitely did that, which I enjoyed. There are also a lot of, like, musings on, like, the nature of humanity and stuff like that. I liked them. I will say, towards the start of this book, I think I got a little bit annoyed, because there were some musings which felt a little bit like, you know, like, there's that Simpsons thing, like, angry man waves fist at sky, or something. There were a few musings which felt a little bit like, people today don't appreciate love, or, like, insert topic here. And I was like, I understand that whilst there are some valid critiques to be made about the way in which, like, we as a society are now dependent on X, Y, and Z, like, that doesn't mean, like, we no longer value, like, these universal things. But, like, I think that was part of the characterization of this man who has been alive for so long and he's just tired. I think I definitely got most into this book towards the latter quarter of it. I think I spent some of the start enjoying it, but okay, this is the problem, is I know people who've absolutely with their whole soul fallen in love with this book, and so I maybe went in with, like, very high expectations, and so I perfectly enjoyed reading it, but at times I was like, well, like, you know when, like, someone loves it and you're like, I'm not having the same reaction, and why is that? And I think it's just because the musings didn't, like, reach into my soul and grab me. I can definitely see how you would adore it. I just didn't get that reaction. So now, you know, like, you get all self-conscious and you're like, am I having the right reading experience? I did. It was my reading experience, therefore it was right. But yes, so enjoyed. Definitely interested to check out more Matt Haig. I've heard that Reasons to Stay Alive is very good, so I will definitely be, like, keeping my eyes peeled on that. But an interesting little dabble, I think. Now we're going to talk about a book that I literally just finished before I turned this camera on and started recording. So this is real, like, immediate reactions. But that's Before Mars by Emma Newman, which is the third book in the Planetfall series, which I have reviewed the other two in previous book chats. Planetfall series is really interesting. Let's start there. Insofar as this is the sci-fi universe. Each one of these three books has been set on a different planet with a different narrator, and it has been so interesting as the series has gone on in the way that this narrative has been built up. Because each time we have like our macro story, micro story concept. So like our micro story is like, who's our narrator? In all three of them, there's been some kind of like mystery element. So in our first one, it was like, we knew that something was up. We knew that our narrator was hiding something. We knew that other people were hiding something. It's like this whole thing. And then there's, in the second book, our main character was a detective, and he is quite literally trying to solve a mystery of who killed some guy. In this one, it's Anna is an artist and a geologist, and she's been sent to Mars to do geology, but also kind of painting for this really rich guy. And when she arrives, there are various clues that everything is not as it seems. It's a little bit unsettling, and then we're trying to puzzle out like various things and discover stuff, if you will. And then we have this macro story, and this macro story, the first book, it's called Planetfall. Planetfall is the name of the ship that fell down to this planet. It's all about this pathfinder who has had a vision from God, and it's the concept of this God planet, and they have built this really advanced technology, and they've gone to find the God planet. The second book is at Earth, and we're looking at what was left behind, and all of that sort of thing. And the second book had a hell of an ending, and there are many ramifications which are now playing out in this third book, despite the fact that the third book is set on Mars and focuses on something completely different. But there are all these little links that are like joining these stories together and weaving them together. And so I would love if there's a fourth book. I'm really hoping there's a fourth book. I feel like it's already set it up for a fourth book, because I feel like another book, or maybe even another two books, just keep going with it, Emma, but like another book will give us the opportunity to really bring the threads together. We've very much been like, each book setting things up, getting us places, moving the plot along, and now I kind of want to see it all like come together, because there's some really interesting things at the end of the first book which I'm still sitting with, I'm still mulling over, and I'm really interested to see how this is going to play in with all of this extra stuff. This was very vague because I don't want to spoil anything, but suffice to say, this is a really interesting sci-fi series. It's like a sci-fi mystery. If you're good with sci-fi mysteries, if it doesn't have to be like, if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, then I would really recommend this series, because we're going interesting places. I'm going to leave it there. Only 4 books this time, but I feel like they've given me lots to think about, and I've had lots of like musings based on them. I'm still sort of like sitting with all of these. They're like running in the back of my brain quite a lot. Have you read any of these? I would really love to hear your thoughts on them if you have. And other than that, I hope you're having a really lovely day. I will see you next week for something different.